My name is Mara, and I'm an astrophotographer, which means I photograph the night sky. I do photograph other things, but the stars are my favorite. My main job is a scientist, but I do as much photography as possible on the weekends. I always loved photography, but I started to take it more seriously when I bought a camera 7 years ago. I then started to do some hiking with other photography friends to capture sunrises and sunsets in the beautiful places around the world like mountains and lakes. But because I'm very passionate about space since I was a little girl, I started to do astrophotography as well. The night sky has so many beautiful subjects that I never get tired of it. The sky is full of wonders, and everywhere you look, there can be an opportunity to take a beautiful photo. The sun and the moon both rise on the east and set on the west. The center of our Milky Way is visible during the summer months by looking south. And if you point a camera towards the north, for a few hours you can see star trails forming around the North Star due to the Earth's rotation around its axis. Astrophotography is the art of photographing stars and other celestial bodies, like comets, the Milky Way, the moon, and even our sun. Here are some of the astrophotos I took over the years, and even though I enjoyed them all, I do have a favorite subject, the Milky Way. When I say Milky Way, I'm talking about the core, or the center of the Milky Way, which is also known as galactic core. Our galaxy is spiral, as we can see in this NASA figure. And we live in one of the arms, and that's why we can see its core, which is shown here on the bar image on the right. The core of the Milky Way can be located in the night sky by finding the constellation Sagittarius. The galactic core, it's the brightest part of our galaxy, and therefore the most beautiful to photograph. In the Milky Way, we live around that green star marked on the NASA image. We have a good view of the core, but the galactic core is not always visible from the United Kingdom and the rest of the Northern Hemisphere. It's only visible for a few months out of the year, around March to October, during what we call the Milky Way season. Around October, the Milky Way will start to sink on the horizon and will be now visible in the southern hemisphere until we see it again in the northern hemisphere in March. In spring, we can see the Milky Way during the hours before sunrise. Summer is the best time to see it and photograph it because the core will be visible all night long. During autumn, the best time to see it is after sunset when it gets dark enough. Since the Milky Way is one of my favorite subjects to photograph, I want to teach you how to capture it as well. Photographing at night is very challenging, and the cameras on our phones are not as good as the cameras I use and other photographers use, but it's still possible to photograph the Milky Way with a smartphone. The first thing we need to do to photograph the Milky Way is to drive to a very dark location. In cities around the world, because of light pollution, we cannot see the Milky Way. When I want to see it, I drive, for example, to the countryside. We also have to pick exact dates that are close to the new moon. Each month has a full and a new moon. Full moons are very big and bright and don't allow us to have a clear view of all of the stars. I usually photograph the Milky Way within 1 week before and 1 week after a new moon. You will also need a tripod, which is a support with 3 legs for your phone or camera, as you can see in this image. In astrophotography, we use a tripod to make sure the phone and camera don't move around and stay still. If you don't have a tripod, your night photos will be very blurry and not sharp as we want them to be. You don't have a tripod? No worries. I will also teach you how to make an easy one. In photography, we use different types of lenses depending on what we want to photograph. For example, we use very long lenses for the moon and the sun to make them look as big as possible. But for stars and the Milky Way, we want to capture as much of the sky as possible, and so we use a different type of lenses here. We call it wide lenses. The good news is that you don't have to worry about a lens because our smartphones already capture a relatively wide view. In addition to dark skies, no moon, a tripod, we also need to know how to control our cameras manually. As you might know, our phones are smart enough to determine the best settings to take photos in different conditions. At night, because it's so dark, they will automatically take a photo with flash to make it brighter. But flash is going to ruin our astrophotos because light in general, like city lights and moonlight, interfere with the amount of light that we see from the stars. To solve this problem, we need to know how to control our cameras. In order to do that, you need to find the manual or professional mode on your camera's phone. The majority of smartphones have this pro mode where you can get control of how your camera will take a photo. Remember when I told you we would make a tripod? Before we start playing with the controls of the camera phone, let's make a tripod. We will need tape, scissors, and a plastic cup. Remember to be careful when using the scissors. It's better to ask someone for help. You can do it with a plastic or a paper cup, but I found paper cup much more stable. Start by making a hole at the bottom of the cup and then start cutting towards the sides. Make 2 cuts in each side. And remember that all 4 cuts need to have the same size. If you're afraid of scratching your phone, especially with plastic, just cover the edges of the cup with tape. Now let's go back to the manual controls. Before we start changing them, let me explain to you what they are. The first you'll change is the ISO. Increasing the ISO number makes the photo brighter, decreasing it makes it darker. The shutter speed is another control, and the shutter speed is the amount of time the camera sensor is exposed to light. By changing the shutter speed, you can take a quick photo and freeze a person that's running, or you can let the camera take a long exposure photo. The last one can take up to a few seconds or even minutes. If you have people running or dancing in your photo, when you do a long exposure of a few seconds, you will record the movement's blur instead of the moment frozen in time. Another setting that we can use to increase brightness in our photos is the aperture, also known as f-stop. The f-stop controls the amount of light that enters the camera. The lower the f-stop, the wider the aperture and more light will enter the camera. A camera works by capturing light. In astrophotography, because we're photographing in the dark, we need to capture as much light as possible. So the number we can use to capture the most amount of light is a high ISO. Some smartphones can go all the way up to 3000. A slow shutter speed, 30 seconds is a good amount of time, and a low f-stop, 2.8 or less. Let's now grab your phone and start changing the controls. Start with ISO and increase it to the maximum value that your phone allows. As you can see in this image, the ISO is already set up to maximum, around 3000. Then change the shutter speed, which is represented by a circular symbol. Some phones will only go up to 8 seconds, while the most recent ones can go up to 30 seconds. If your phone is like mine and only does 8 seconds, in the next slide I'll show you a trick to overcome this obstacle. It is also important to change the focus. When photographing the Milky Way, we should use infinity focus so the camera can focus in the faraway light rather than a close object. If you're using a camera, infinity will be marked by the infinity loop. In a smartphone, it's usually represented by two mountains. It's also very useful to set up a timer. Do 10 seconds or longer if possible. Self-timers are usually represented by clocks. They help prevent shaking by giving enough time for your camera to stabilize after you put it on the tripod. If your phone's shutter speed doesn't go all the way to 30 seconds, you can try to stack a few photos. Take 3 photos with maximum ISO and slowest shutter speed, for example 808 seconds. Next, download this free Google app called Snapseed. In Snapseed, you can try to stack your 3 photos to have more detail and less noise. Open the Snapseed app, go to Double Exposure, select the photos and choose Lighten. Now the details of more than one photo will show up. Here are a couple of examples of Milky Way photos taken with smartphones. All these 3 photos were taken at ISO 3200 for 30 seconds. The second and the third photos were taken with phones and the first one with a simple camera for comparison. These 3 images were taken by my astrophotographer friend Miguel, who spends a lot of time taking photos of the Milky Way with smartphones. On the other hand, I spend a lot of time taking astrophotos with an advanced camera rather than a phone because I print my photos in very large formats. But I want to show you the difference between phones, simple cameras, and an advanced camera. In this church photo that I took with my advanced camera, I used 20 seconds instead of 30 seconds to avoid star trails which occur when you leave the shutter speed open for a long time. I also added the photo I got straight out of my camera, called the RAW file, and the one that I edited for comparison. An important part of astrophotography is editing the photos and trying to make the Milky Way stand out. So here's the before and after the edit. I edit my photos in Lightroom and Photoshop, which are the standard in photography, but Snapseed, the app I mentioned before, is a great tool to start. In Snapseed, you can also play with curves like I do in Lightroom and in Photoshop. Curves is one of the most powerful tools since you can adjust darkness, brightness, and even colors. Colors can be adjusted with white balance as well, and this will help you achieve a more realistic look. I also like to add vignette to my Milky Way photo so the Milky Way that's in the middle of the photo will pop out more. Since it's October, the end of the Milky Way season, we don't have much time left to capture the Milky Way this year, but I'll give you some of my photos so you can practice your editing skills during the winter and be ready when the core of the Milky Way visits our skies again at the beginning of next year. In the meantime, don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions.